The Giraffe in the Room. Copyright Kutluono-Mothaleezy 2018. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, NBSP, recording or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other NBSP, non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. Published by Kutluono-Mothaleezy. Email, ariacapital@gmail.com. First printing, 2018. ISBN 978-96968-07336. Acknowledgements. I would personally like to appreciate and give thanks to all the individuals who assisted with the completion of this body of work both as professional cutesy and earnest cherishment. More specifically, I would like to give a huge thank you to Pearl Mutgotlan for her invaluable input into this masterpiece. To all my colleagues and family who without exception constantly inspired and pushed me towards the completion of this book, I hold you all in great regard. Thank you. Forward. The intention of this book is not to drive a rift between individual perceptions of their realities and the strong views presented in the book. Rather, its goal is to shed light on subjects of popular culture that are in some ways regarded as intuitive and otherwise overlooked. Most times books of this caliber are written by experts, and because of them being professional scholars on their subject matters, their approach, reasoning and interpretations are usually disconnected from that of the regular Joe. It is with due pleasure for me to state that this particular book is written not with an expert approach, but instead it is written with an everyday and most realistic perception to daily life. It is a well-researched body of work that will stand the test of time. The expectation of this book is to resonate with people not just at an intellectual level, but at an impressionable level as well, leading to insights and awareness on individual reasoning and individual perceptions on aspects of popular culture. Popular culture meaning modern-day culture, which is a result of the evolution of traditional culture. Why popular culture? Because popular culture is what we are all exposed to and in some ways we all participate in. It is the predominant culture to date. We live in an era of social variables that change daily, thus influencing our general outlook of life. Therefore, this book seeks to be a dipstick to which individuals can reflect on how much they are influenced, exposed and affected by trends. A clear understanding of aspects of this culture goes a long way towards the betterment of quality of life within said culture. The views and ideologies presented within this body of work are extremely compelling. It is with this in mind that it is advisable to go through this book at a slow pace with regular introspection from chapter to chapter. Chapter 1. Feminism. Equality and access to equal opportunities for everyone regardless of gender or any other prejudices is by far one of the most important things, especially in a society that likes to pride itself on non-discrimination of all its citizens. Discrimination on any basis should be absolutely intolerable. The ideal society is one where all the people within that society are weighed on the same scale and judged solely on performance and delivery. Unfortunately, we do not live in this idealized society. Nonetheless, that does not mean steps cannot be taken towards the realization of this idealized way of living. The abolition of patriarchal societies is one of the forefront movements to date. The recognition and acknowledgement of the girl-child's abilities across all avenues of life tends to cause much heated debates. Which of course it shouldn't, considering that with the boy-child there is no such. Within our patriarchal societies, the girl-child's abilities and capabilities are specified to only certain areas of life. Her transition from these specified areas or imposed boundaries of life is looked upon with scorn. There tends to be certain expectations from the girl child which most often than not restricts her from exploring her full potential and capabilities. While the opposite is true for the boy child, for the most part. It is for this reason in particular that the modern woman finds it necessary to advocate for her liberation through feminism. Because the modern woman feels she has been subjugated, feminism is her place of refuge. Rising from this kind of oppression, what follows is liberation, but however, there tends to be a bit of confusion on what exactly is she liberated from. This confusion comes about because this liberation is somewhat a new experience for her. She therefore identifies this kind of liberation with what men have been at liberty to do that she couldn't. This way of thinking is not entirely wrong, but it's a bit flawed. It is the reason why not all but most of the modern women tend to gravitate towards imitating men. An example is the nipple campaign. In case you missed it, this was a huge feminism movement in the year 2016 where women were challenging the notion that why can't they unveil their nipples whenever they feel the need, considering that men can freely do so without any prejudice. After all, our nipples look the same, but however there is some kind of vulgar surrounding the display of the female nipples. So women were strongly challenging this notion to the point where protests and sponsored walks were organized and conducted for this very purpose. There is absolutely nothing wrong with people standing up to inequality. The problem here though is that the modern woman wants to more and more behave like her counterpart. Understand, I am not saying women should behave womanly and men should behave manly. What I am putting forward is that there are great differences between women and men, therefore instead of women attempting to outshine men at what they do, the modern woman should exert herself and strive to be her own person and not a duplicate of her counterpart. Women should not want to be men because they are not men, and the same applies to men. Instead, a baseline of differences should be established between the two genders. This baseline of differences is an identification of qualities that are generally unique to only women as well as those that are unique to only men. Once this is established, each gender can then play to their strengths instead of focusing on who can do what and who can't. Practices and customs that subjugate women can then be challenged. The reason there is so much resistance from both sides on this feminism issue is because of the lack of appreciation on what exactly differentiates the two genders. An approach of do's and don'ts ultimately leads to mimicry. The more someone is restricted from doing a certain thing, the more they find the need to do that very thing when they get the opportunity. This will always result in the modern woman imitating men, since men are the subjugators dictating what a woman can and cannot do. Upon feeling liberated, the modern woman then does exactly what she was prevented from doing. This then isn't liberation but rather acts of rebelling. The thing about rebelling is that most often than not it holds no permanent solutions. It's rather continuous with a constant change of things being rebelled against. Today it may be the issue of nipples and tomorrow it's something else. It's seldom that permanent solutions ever come from being primarily rebellious. A baseline of differences that distinguish women from men, and a clear understanding and appreciation of those distinguishing factors is exactly what is needed to progressively tackle the issue of feminism. Failure to do so will result in a never-ending back and forth between feminists and non-feminists, consequently increasing the rift between the two classes. This rift is of no benefit to either side because at the end of the day there needs to be coexistence. Another hindrance worth mentioning is that of the traditionalist versus the modern women. By definition, traditionalists are on the most part very cultural individuals who consider the dynamism of culture a threat to their cultural norms, which almost always advocates for the subjugation of women. Traditionalists subscribe to cultural customs derived from customary practices. These customary practices are usually culture-based, meaning they are derived from the way our grandmothers lived, which was way before the 21st century. This was the time when a single man could have multiple wives and they would all be stay-at-home wives with their primary function as serving their husband. Traditionalists still somewhat maintain a similar or slightly diluted view towards the girl child to date. It is these individuals who infuriate the modern women and above all makes her find the need in emulating what men do as a way to communicate her rebellious nature towards gender oppression. This however never has the desired effect on either side because the traditionalist tends to lose respect for a non-cultured woman and the modern woman also loses respect and resents the cultured man/woman. Consider the diagram below as it attempts to clearly explain this phenomenon. The above diagram puts the feminist versus the traditionalist phenomenon into perspective. The two groups' outlook on the matter of feminism is as different as it can possibly be. Feminists perceive restrictive and oppressive practices which they voice out through feminist activism. Some of these restrictive and oppressive practices are listed on the feminist side of the diagram. Traditionalists on the other hand perceive practices which feminists regard as restrictive and oppressive as cultural norms and customs. They view these practices as their tradition which they value above all else. For that reason there tends to be a massive disconnect between the two groups. This becomes a problem because it segregates society into feminists and non-feminists. This segregation is so strong and passionate that it's highly unlikely to find the two harmoniously working together in whatever setting. This being a result of the personal nature surrounding this issue, and this lack of workmanship tears the fabric of society apart. There is an intolerance of the masculinity of traditionalist by feminist and inversely an intolerance of the female stance on feminism by traditionalists. Traditionalists are for the most part predominantly men and feminists are predominantly women. Men and women have completely different realities, our experiences and perceptions are just not the same. Men, who consist of our grandfathers, fathers, brothers, sons and uncles never get the same cognitive impressions as our grandmothers, mothers, sisters, daughters and aunts. This has nothing to do with our upbringing, we are just hardwired differently. Our neurological connections are different. While we have the same neurons that process emotional experiences, they are however connected to different areas of the brain in both males and females respectively. In females they are connected to areas of the brain responsible for internal aspects of the body, these being hormones, blood pressure and respiration. In males, these same neurons are connected to areas of the brain responsible for external functions, functions of movement and vision. Studies show that this leads to distinguished behaviors such as women being more in tune with their emotions and more likely to refer to them during daily encounters, while men are the complete opposite. Men have more dispassionate emotional states. Furthermore, women's verbal functions have bilateral neural connections compared